Hi, and welcome to Beyond the Red Carpet. I'm Francine Brokaw. Today I have a special guest, Manny Pacheco, and he is a historian of sorts for old-time Hollywood. He's written a series of books called Forgotten Hollywood. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
And if the name sounds familiar, you probably heard him on the radio, KNX 1070 News Radio. You do the...
I'm a traffic anchor, yeah.
Traffic anchor.
Yeah.
That's interesting to go from Hollywood to traffic.
Well,
So-
I began in radio. Actually, Hollywood came later.
And he's also a professor. You're a professor. See, you're a man of many talents. But let's start off talking about your book series. How did you get involved in Forgotten Hollywood, and what sparked your interest in that to begin with?
Well, I've always had a fascination for Hollywood and movies and television and music. My parents were really big on emphasizing education. But my grandmother, my wonderful grandmother, she was really big on the humanities. She never missed a chance to try to introduce me to different kinds of music, and she loved television. And when Turner Classic Movies became a wonderful staple on cable television, as she got older and more house-ridden, I would visit her during my time at UCLA. When I would finish my studies, I would go visit her during the middle of the day, and we would watch Turner Classic Movies together. Now, truth be told, she loved the horror films. She loved King Kong and Mighty Joe Young and Frankenstein. I loved the women's pictures. I loved Claude Rains and Betty Davis and the Warner Brothers pictures. But we still had something to talk about. Even though there might be a 40 or 50 year difference in age, we found a common ground, and that's where my first interest in Hollywood came.
So growing up, did you go to movies all the time?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. My mom would love to take my sister and I to matinees. We were weaned on Disney, of course, and we would watch some great early movies that paired Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis.
Yes.
And we would watch a lot of comedies, and I was an early fan of Shirley MacLaine when she started hitting it big.
She's one of my favorites. I'm glad you mentioned her. I just adore her.
Well, I love Shirley MacLaine growing up, and I also had a real affinity for Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. But my favorite actor but that was always on television. I never got to see him on the big screen. Except once I did, but that came later. Is Spencer Tracy.
Oh, yeah. I just saw a movie of his last night called The Last Hurrah.
The Last Hurrah, wonderful.
Yes.
Columbia Pictures, with all the great Irish mafia actors that supported him: Pat O'Brien, Frank McHugh, Donald Crisp, James Gleason. I mean, just the list goes on and on. Basil Rathbone. I mean, just fabulous actors that supported him in that movie.
I'm amazed. You're an encyclopedic mind with all this, knowing all these. That's my job, is to write about them, but I can't remember.
Well, that helped. Radio helped because it's a great multitasking job that I have, and when you're doing traffic, which is what I do, I'm a weekend traffic anchor. You're constantly looking at what's going on in Orange County and in Los Angeles. Well, that kind of pays off when you're trying to put together books about a lot of different great character actors, as I do, 56 total so far and counting in my 3 books in the Forgotten Hollywood book series. And but it takes a lot of research and a lot of know-how. And looking back at my growing up with my grandmother and my parents taking us to the movies, I just always seem to remember certain scenes in movies, the character actors in movies, the great stars, and the great plots that were written specifically for the screen by fabulous authors. So that's really what helped.
Now, I've only read your 3rd book, Road to Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History.
Well, I do have 3 books.
Yes.
The first one's called Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History. But then I wanted to kind of have some fun, because I do realize that Hollywood has a great history of trying to repeat a success. For example, when Frankenstein came out, then they had to have The Bride of Frankenstein, then Son of Frankenstein. So my second book took that idea, because there were so many great sons of the Sheik, and sons of Kong, sons of Frankenstein, even Son of Flubber. So I decided to call my second book Son of Frankenstein. Now, the third book is Road to Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History. And the reason why I called it with the beginning of Road is because I was paying homage to Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and those great Paramount comedies.
Dorothy Lamour.
Dorothy Lamour, exactly. So I try to keep that same kind of strategy that these great movie moguls had. So maybe my next book might be The Adventures of Forgotten Hollywood.
Oh, great. There's going to be another one. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get into some stories. I know you specifically say that history of Hollywood is tied into the history of this country.
It's, yeah, Americana and Hollywood intersect much like Hollywood and Vine. So I call these moments Hollywood and Vine moments. It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
And what I do is I tie how Hollywood at many times are at the forefront of social and cultural issues. Sometimes they lag behind. And that's the truth. I mean, unfortunately, that's true. But many times they're at the forefront of great times in American history, particularly American history, such as the end of World War II, the Great Depression, McCarthyism, how we look at disease and disability, the Kennedy assassination. So many great things, believe it or not, are tied to Hollywood. And I have this weird ability to look at an actor or a movie and tie it to American history, and vice versa. I can look at a certain thing that happens in Americana and then tie it to Hollywood. For example,
yes.
You might remember Superstorm Sandy. That went up the eastern seaboard, yeah, and it was awful, and it really did some real damage in many states. And it began in North Carolina, and one of the first casualties was this grand ship that was actually used in the movie, the remake of Mutiny on the Bounty, the movie that starred Marlon Brando and Trevor Howard. So that was the first casualty. In fact, the captain of the ship, which was now a touring ship, passed away. As it moved up the eastern seaboard into New Jersey, it went into the home of where Grace Kelly and Frank Sinatra grew up, which is Hoboken, New Jersey. And then it just completely destroyed the pier and the wharfs along the eastern part of New Jersey, where On the Waterfront was filmed. Superstorm Sandy was particularly evil to Marlon Brando. I've got to tell you. But I can always seem to tie Americana or things that happen in American history to Hollywood. It's just one of those weird things.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. I want to touch on your Odd Couple that you...
Oh, yes.
Tell a story about that.
One of my favorite stories.
I love that story. Go ahead.
Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet didn't look like they belonged together in films, yet they made 9 films together. One was huge. He was a large man with a deep, menacing voice and 60 years of age. He started his career at the age of 60, only had an 8-year career. And the other was small with big banjo eyes and a funny voice, and had a much longer career, Peter Lorre. Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre were first teamed in the movie The Maltese Falcon. And then came the second movie they appeared together, which they didn't appear in any scene together, but they appeared in the same movie, in a classic movie, of course, Casablanca. And
they were not in any scene?
No.
Oh, that's right.
And the reason for that, if I can do a spoiler alert here.
No, go ahead. I know everybody's seen the show.
Of course. Peter Lorre passes away. He's actually murdered by the police before Sidney Greenstreet even appears in the movie. So they never appeared together. But Jack Warner found that the two had such great chemistry that they actually ordered up 7 more movies, and usually they had to do with crime and punishment and even war. And at the same time that they were making movies, FDR was engaged in a real conflict, World War II, and he was particularly interested in the opportunity to harness atomic energy. And so he had the best and the brightest working 6 days a week, 20-hour days literally. I mean, just long, long days of scientists and military personnel with their families in tow. And
that was in the New Mexico.
Actually, across the country, but particularly in New Mexico. Right. Yes, there was a base in New Mexico, but they were in bases all across the country. They were working. Well, one of the scientists actually became a huge movie fan, and they would air movies on their day off for the families to enjoy. First run movies. It was a patriotic gift to these folks that were working very, very hard. So movies from 20th Century Fox, MGM, Paramount, and Warner Brothers, including movies with, of course, Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre. And this scientist was just a big, big fan. So when they tested the first bomb, because they weren't sure it was going to explode, and they did that in New Mexico, as you alluded to, he nicknamed that bomb after one of his favorite movies, The Thin Man. And it was written by Dashiell Hammett. It was one of his favorite authors, and he loved the Thin Man movie. Well, when the second and third bombs were created, the bombs that were actually dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that same scientist who loved Dashiell Hammett decided to nickname both bombs the Little Boy and the Fat Man, named after the actual monikers that were used by Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet in The Maltese Falcon, again written by Dashiell Hammett. So
that's an incredible story.
They are tied to the end of World War II. And one more footnote, because I know that we had talked about this before we went on. They could not clamp the Fat Man very well into the airplane, and they were afraid that it was going to actually explode in midair. So they had to order clamps. Well, they went to a company that happened to be owned by the retired member of the Marx Brothers, Zeppo Marx, because once the Marx Brothers went from Paramount to MGM, Zeppo retired. He opened up a parts factory, and he ordered up plenty of different mechanical parts and munitions for the war effort, and one of those parts was the clamps that were holding the Fat Man bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki, another tie to Hollywood.
Oh, this is amazing. This is okay.
I can give you one more from that too.
Yeah, please go on. This is fascinating. I didn't know any of this.
They were sure after the war that these bombs still could not drop with any degree of accuracy, so they tested one more in the Easter Islands in 1946. And the pilots who went to fly that mission the night before went to see their favorite actress in a wonderful movie called Gilda. We're talking about Rita Hayworth and Glenn Ford. Well, they nicknamed and printed on the bomb Gilda. So there's a tie to Rita Hayworth, and when she found out, she was ticked off. She was livid.
Oh, wow.
Because she thought that they were saying that her movies were bombs.
Oh my God.
And it took her husband, Orson Welles, to explain that when the first bomb was dropped, that the plane was called the Enola Gay, named after the pilot, Colonel Tibbets, his mother. So that was a positive. And basically what they were doing is they were just honoring her by naming it Gilda.
We will honor you with an atomic bomb.
We will honor you with an atomic bomb. Now, isn't that's for somebody who has everything?
Yeah.
But the
great Christmas gift.
That's right. That's right. You can order now and you get 2 for 1. But Orson Welles, he made her write a letter of thanks, and when she finally calmed down, she did that. So lots of ties to Hollywood.
Yes, I know you are particularly interested in the conversion from novels to the big screen.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
I don't think we do that enough today. But truth be told, we had some fabulous authors in the first part of the 20th century, and they were more than willing to work in the movies. That's not so much, that doesn't happen much today. But back then, we had folks like F. Scott Fitzgerald and...
the 20s was a wealth of writers.
Absolutely. You had Ernest Hemingway and Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams. And the list just goes on with just great opportunities to translate literature into movies. And I think that's something that's missing. The movie moguls had it right. They figured that if they wrote a great story, everything else would take care of itself. And you'll notice when folks win Academy Awards or Oscars, even to this day, after thanking God and thanking family, they usually thank the writer of the screenplay. They'll thank the person who actually put the words in their mouths. And that's the way it should be. Today, movies are made for visual purposes. I think we're in the digital age, and that causes that. And so that the stories aren't as good, the characters aren't as fleshed out. But back in those days, we had really dynamic characters, and that stretches from the A-list stars to the individuals who were actually the names that appear below the titles of films.
And I remember a couple months ago, Ben Mankiewicz from Turner Classic Movies, he said that the old movies relied on the words and not the effects. Today, they don't rely as much on the story as they do on all the hoopla that comes with it.
And all the historians say the same thing. And not just movie historians. I mean, yes, Robert Osborne always preached that choir, as Ben Mankiewicz does, and Leonard Maltin. But you will find that if you hear the messages that are derived from folks like Doris Kearns Goodwin and David McCullough, they say that they like to tell their stories based on the writings of diaries and letters from individuals who were there at the time of something great that was happening, and that they're afraid that today that's not going to be the case because we have disposable messages in the form of tweets and emails. So, but there is hope, and that hope is the individuals that do podcasts and who write blogs of interest to them and to whoever follow those blogs. Those might be the future stories that historians will find and then document in future stories that need to be told about the first half of the 21st century.
Let me pick your brain. What about the new shows that they're fictionalized versions of the truth, like the Chappaquiddick? We don't know what happened because nobody can talk about what happened in the car.
In some cases, the stories are remarkably accurate, and I'll tell you why I know this, because I'll watch a movie and then I'll go and do a little research to see how accurate they were. And I'm finding that in some cases, in fact most cases, they've done their homework. There was one in particular that I was just absolutely amazed at how accurate they were. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it had to do with the writer of Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
And about how he suffered
Milne.
from A.A. Milne, and how he suffered from shell shock because of World War I, and then what he put his child through. Christopher Robin, the character, it wasn't his real name, but the idea that he was called Christopher Robin, and the child didn't grow up happy, and he didn't like Winnie the Pooh, and I did a lot of research, and he died a young man, unfortunately. And so, that was very accurate, and I was very pleased to see that was something that they did their homework. And I'm hoping this next movie that comes out about Neil Armstrong, First Man. It sounds to me that they've done their homework, that they really captured the little things that made this assignment harrowing. Because everybody likes to look back and think it was a brave and it was a noble thing to do. But truth be told, I mean, Richard Nixon had a message to the American people talking about how 2 space warriors were going to be lost to the ages. And it was a very grim time at the White House.
Yes.
So that made the journey and the effort even more magnificent. And they're going to really capture that essence, I believe, in this movie. And I would imagine that Damien Chazelle is one of those wonderful directors that pays attention to those kinds of details. So I'm hoping that'll happen.
I'm hoping, yes. I like it when they do their research and they give us what happened. You still can't guarantee that everything went on, but as long as they've done their research and gotten to the point, I think that does justice to the story.
And I have to tell you, what I found out in my books, the Forgotten Hollywood book series, is that many times they got it wrong back in the golden age. I mean, it's amazing how many stories they did not get right. They would assign heroic actions to another character because it's played by an A-list actor that was won The Last of the Mohicans back in 1939, where the actual saving of the New York colony was done by a character played by Ward Bond, but Ward Bond wasn't the star, so they assigned the heroic action to Henry Fonda, who was the star. And so poor Ward Bond became an asterisk in the movie, but truth be told, he was the hero.
Well, that you know, I spoke with James Garner one time about making The Great Escape, and he said that the motorcycle.
Oh, Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen.
Yes.
Was not happy with his character because he wanted to be the hero. So they had to rewrite it while they were over in Germany filming. Have you heard that story too?
No, I hadn't heard that story at all.
Yeah, and Garner said, "Babe, whatever." Garner's character was supposed to be the big number one on the ratings list, but Steve McQueen just needed to be the one to go out and get the path and all that, and come back and bring it back to be the hero. So
well, that movie is based on a true story.
Right.
Although it's a fabulous movie with a terrific score by Elmer Bernstein. But I will tell you that many of those scenes are very fictionalized Hollywood glitz.
Yes.
It's an entertaining movie. It's one of the best, I think, World War II films ever made, this side of The Longest Day and The Guns of Navarone. But I don't buy that a lot of that happened.
No, I mean, you can't put everything fact by fact there because it won't be that entertaining, but still, I love the movie.
It's a great movie with colorful characters. Again,
and music.
Fabulous character actors. Richard Attenborough is wonderful in the movie. Donald Pleasance just about steals every scene he's in. Just great character actors in support of Steve McQueen and James Garner.
Yes. And McQueen would be happy you mentioned him first.
Well, Steve McQueen did have that problem many times.
Oh,
actually,
yeah.
He had that problem with the film The Magnificent Seven.
Mm-hmm.
He did not like that Yul Brynner got top billing, and every single time he was in a scene with Brenner, he would actually build a mound so that he could stand toe to toe with Yul, and that was pretty interesting. Yul Brynner just laughed it off because he just thought, well, this guy's got an ego. And then the making of a Towering Inferno, really famous argument between McQueen and Newman, even though Newman really stars in the film. The way they worked out the titles at the beginning of the film is that they put Steve McQueen first, but then they put Paul Newman second, but his name is above McQueen's. So it's off to the
right side.
It's on the right side.
Because you're supposed to be at the left side is the star.
Right,
and
but it's
that's
weird
what
how
they did with Laverne and Shirley. That's how I remember on that show that was a big to-do, is to make Laverne and Shirley.
Titles are very peculiar. That's something to be negotiated by actors, so it happens, absolutely. So, but I will tell you that my emphasis in my books are with the stars who don't get enough credit. I believe that there is a certain age group that's going to be able to see actors that are familiar and then not know their names. We're always going to remember Humphrey Bogart, Clark Gable, Elizabeth Taylor, James Stewart, Cary Grant. We're going to always remember Marilyn Monroe and James Dean. But what about those great character actors who appeared in literally hundreds of films, who are very familiar, but you just seem to not be able to remember their names. I mean, it's easy to remember Peter Lorre, for example, in Sydney Greenstreet, but sometimes people will look at Claude Rains or Lionel Barrymore or Frank Morgan, and they don't remember their names. They're just a generation from being completely forgotten, and they're part of memorable movies like Casablanca, the Stagecoach, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz. Fabulous movies, and yet the faces are familiar, but the names are becoming forgotten.
Well, you have a lot of fabulous stories, and when we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Manny Pacheco. And this is fabulous. We're learning so much.